As far as I know, the Jewish and black people in the United States have always had a linkage or a sensibility to one another that has meant we have often been in the same struggle for change. So I have known this probably all my life, since at least high school. In terms of the politics of things, I have known that for 100 years, in the presidential years of our elections in the United States, the Jewish community and the black community have voted always on the same side. We both know what it means, what it is meant to be in the United States with an invitation to be here that is hostile. And if we have not thought that there was a wide enough difference between two presidential candidates, we knew on which side we had the better chance of continuing to dismantle the hostility and to allow the United States to become more of the country it needed to become. I think that came to a head in the 1950s and 60s, the late 1950s and 60s, as in fact a new dimension in struggle for black people came into being. The school decision of May 17, 1954, where for the first time Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP got the Supreme Court to make a unanimous decision that segregation does not permit equality. Jim Crow law obliterates the possibility. Segregation law and spirit and custom is in contradiction to the Constitution. Between 1789 and 1954, the Supreme Court had never given a positive verdict on human rights. I've just discovered that in the last 2 or 3 months, that between 1789 and May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court has only given largely negative decisions to black people, to women, to Asian people, to Indians. So that Supreme Court decision of 1954 is what caused the emergence in many ways of a new spiritual awareness among all kinds of black people and Jewish people. We knew in the black community that the Eurocentric communities in the United States were largely too supportive of anti-Semitism and racism. I knew that. Our most important allies, I think this can be said, the most important allies for the nonviolent movement of America, 1953 to 1973, and the most important allies in the South, where I lived for 17 years and worked directly with Martin Luther King Jr. in the development of that movement. Our most important white allies were Jewish people. Many could not speak out and did not speak out, but a lot of their leadership where I worked, in Birmingham, in St. Augustine, Florida, in Nashville, Tennessee, where I lived for a time, in Memphis, Tennessee, where I lived for 12 years in the struggle. The Jewish community were our most sensitive and human allies. There were fears in the Jewish community that too close identity would cause an outburst of anti-Semitism, which is true. But the sensitivity to that alliance was a problem for the whole nation. Because in the white community, any white person who identified with desegregation, with multi-ethnicity, with the fact that there is such a thing as an interfaith dimension of life to which we should all belong, in the white community, it would be very horrendous in 1960 to identify with that ecumenical spirit, with that interfaith spirit in religion. So the Jewish sensitivities were not unwarranted. They were true also in the black community, because many black people thought, well, I'll give one specific illustration. Nashville, Tennessee considered itself in the 50s a city that did not exemplify the harsh, unshackled dimensions of segregation. So when we began organizing in 58 what became the Nashville campaign, there were people in the black community who would have, had we given them a chance, voted against it. Because to go and do a sit-in at Harvey's department store in the tea room or in the dining room that faced an important intersection was to upset the peace of the community. Peace at that time meaning don't talk about these issues. Don't demonstrate on these issues. Don't legally come out to make those issues unconstitutional. There were those in a conventional USA thinking, leadership especially, that said if we just go along, it will gradually disappear. Dr. King speaks against that gradualism. And I'm convinced that the gradualism has to be obliterated, because who gives any of us the right to live in a world, in a country, where babies die in the first year of life and we say we'll gradually take care of it? We don't have that right. We have the power, but we don't have that right. As if we're on the human track, if we're on the human trail, we have to be concerned that we move to obliterate that kind of cruelty as quickly as we can demolish it. And that recognizes it does take time, but it also recognizes time without programs to shape the time will not be helpful. I don't remember, and I would not have been present in the first face-to-face contacts with Rabbi Heschel and Martin King. I do not recall when I first met Rabbi Heschel. I have at least one autographed book from him that he sent me back in the 50s or 60s. I don't know what year that was. By the time I met him, I had read some of his major documents. In fact, I've read a couple since that time. So I don't know if I know that particular history. But 1955, Abraham Heschel was in the pictures of the Selma to Montgomery March, where the Southern Christian Leaders Conference, Dr. King, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was chaired by the late Congressman John Lewis, came together to build a voting registration campaign that would shake the nation, a nonviolent campaign that put registration to vote and the right of voting and access to voting on the front pages of politics. And it's still there today. That was 55, and that's also the time that Rabbi Heschel participated, came south to participate in I think, I'm not sure how many marches he engaged in from Selma to Montgomery, but he was in Montgomery on the final day. And there's a very famous quote of his that I'm not sure I can remember, but he said that in the march, it was as though his legs were praying.
Pray with your feet.
Yes, because it was a march into Montgomery, Alabama. That has become a classical statement across many portions of Judaism and Christianity. And it's a statement that I remember from the 55, from Heschel, which also confirmed in me the sensibility as a pastor that prayer is not primarily a verbal thing, no matter how beautiful that can be in that spiritual history that we have, but that prayer is a way of living, a way of behaving, a way of working, a way of facing up to the realities both in one's own life and in one's own community and family, to issues that need to be changed, to the issues of how we have to unshackle human life. Because in the history of the world, many historical streams have put chains on the human mind and the human spirit and stopped the human race from making the advances we could have made in many centuries. So prayer as a way of being and doing. And I've experienced that. And Rabbi Heschel, his statement, it's as though my legs were praying. Exactly right. Prayer is more often a way of getting things done than it is primarily a word thing. I think the critical issue in the United States is the fact that from Franklin Delano Roosevelt through Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, and through Jimmy Carter, the poor in the United States were beginning to receive wages that enabled them to put food on their tables and to gain shelter and health care. From 1970 and the reorganization of the Chamber of Commerce as a lobbyist on the famous Lewis Powell memo, income for millions of USA people has in fact dropped to the present moment. So I maintain the critical issue has been the shipping of US jobs overseas. At one point, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5.7 million jobs had been shipped out of the United States on the issue of the NAFTA agreement. 5.7 million jobs, where major money was invested in the factories in Mexico and Chile, taken away from the United States because it meant the dividends on Wall Street would increase for the people who held the shares. Our economy's shift to being an investment economy rather than a working, manufacturing, creating wealth economy for all the people is the major problem in my mind. Not race, not religion, not ethnicity, but the failure of governments to see to it that the economy moved forward with access to all 330 million people. That's more behind the white vote, I think, for Trump in 2020 than any other factor. The millions of jobs that was helping people to sustain themselves with living wages is the issue. Well, this is where Senator McConnell either is totally ignorant or simply lies. The Black Lives Matter demonstrations from May to August in 2020 have been studied and are being studied by scholars worldwide. And there is now the very clear knowledge from that so far, and it's still going on, that Black Lives Matter is the largest nonviolent campaign in the history of the United States. It is evolutionary from the 20th century. It's organic. It has produced close to 8,000 demonstrations in more than 2,400 places in all 50 states, and has been, according to the scholarship, 97% nonviolent. The violence has come from white supremacist groups, from Antifa groups, from anarchist groups, three groups that believes violence is essential. These are three groups that in various ways I see as being racist, not just the white supremacist groups, in this sense. And I've had jawbone, face-to-face, uptight conversations with some of these people in '68, in this last decade in Olympia, Washington, in Nashville, Tennessee, in New York, Boston, and Denver. There are these young white men who are weaned on USA culture violence. And they think that nonviolence cannot do the job. So they come out in Los Angeles to demonstrations that the rest of us have created, and they preach nonviolence. And I've even had a couple tell me, well, we have to face the police arm in arm and do wrestle with them on the front line. And I've done any number of workshops on nonviolence with our creative groups working against that stuff. White supremacist groups, the Antifa groups, and the anarcho groups all share a sense that violence is the more powerful way to resolve human conflict. Well, the primary form of self-defense in the United States out of the 19th century and the 20th century was to hang up the guns outside the towns and organize the community in such a way that it was safe for everyone. The stories of Wyatt Earp, Bat Matchison, Wild Bill Hickok, there's so many names where in the 19th century, especially in the latter 1/3 of the 19th century, lawmen who went into places like Dodge City or Wichita or Tombstone and began to quell the use of the guns, and who demanded, and business people and church people and other civic people came together in some of those places and passed ordinances that said the gun could not be in the city limits of the community. So there was a whole social political process in the United States where we made our communities safe so that everyone did not have a gun. So the best self-defense in the United States was the pacification of the gun out of the 19th century, and therefore the creating of community patterns of communication and work and life that secured more and more safety for more and more people. The scenery of white militia groups carrying these big automatic weapons in, that's not a peaceful decision. Because Western history said, among other things, that the man who carries a gun is no doubt ready to use it and kill people. So the biggest self-defense for families and communities is the development of community that is safe for all to live in. And the biggest self-defense for most of us human beings still in the world is not a gun, but our effort to live lives that exist and that are trying to behave in such a fashion as to create a peaceful society. And this is an issue that the Congress is going to have to face. Carrying guns into a demonstration in Lansing, Michigan, or Richmond, Virginia, as happened last year in the pictures that I've seen, is not a peaceful demonstration. The First Amendment does not say you may carry a weapon, and especially a war weapon. Does not say it. It simply says peace, the right of peaceful assembly. And if you have a gun there, you are thinking that you may face a situation in which the gun will be your only protection. There's no way carrying a gun to a demonstration is a peaceful act.
In light of January 6th, and
Yeah.
what has happened there, and how the repercussions are rippling through our society, what do you see happening here in the near term?
For me, the big question is, do we have sufficient state and national leadership that will do the work of investigation and prosecution? There's been no comparable act to that. I know of no black organization that has ever had any kinds of demonstrations with a lot of people armed. As a black community, we have largely resisted that American culture.
You were saying, interestingly enough, about the use of the weapon, hanging the weapon outside the city in order to create security. Our culture has moved in exactly the opposite
Yes,
direction.
we've because for economic reasons we sell millions of guns, and we possess as a people more than 300 million guns. It may be much larger now. I've not looked at that for a while. So that's right. From borrowing the weapon for the sake of safety and security in this middle section of the 20th century and the 21st century, we have moved in the opposite direction. Guns are a good thing. And I think Congress will have to deal with that. And I don't know if there's enough understanding of what's evolving here to do it. There has to be strong investigation and indictment and prosecution. What happened January the 6th, our systems of life must teach that group of people that democracy requires character, serious study and wrestling with issues, and language of conversation that allows us to solve issues and live together. That the gun and the bomb and the tear gas will not allow us to develop in the 21st century. There are many white nationalists I know in our Christian churches. That's about 25% of the population in Christianity in the United States is nativistic, nationalistic, or calling themselves fundamentalist. And that all tends to go together. So too many of us are not in that camp.
What is the role that you see of interfaith in reestablishing a sense of commonality and common decency in this country?
Interfaith work in Los Angeles and a variety of other places in the United States has developed in primary form because practicing religionists in the Islamic, Jewish, Christian religions in the United States, because we are a strong bed of this, but also in Hinduism as well, a strong sense that human preciousness, humanity has a sacredness about it, and that teaching and that sense of love and compassion is to be found in all of the major world religions, as well as in much of the poetry and literature of the past of the human family. So ecumenical interfaith work has been one of the forms of religion in most of the 20th century. That whole process has been troubled and hurt by the various ways in which racism and male chauvinism has come to the attention of the nation. Many of the ways in which this is expressed in the media in the United States today never took place in the 20th century. So this is strictly an evolutionary process. An evolutionary process that has been encouraged by Black Lives Matter campaign, and by GLBTQ organizing, by all kinds of people in the United States who've recognized some of the chains that are on the human race and how these have to be dismantled, unshackled. But in spite of that, and I tend to be critical, in spite of that, without the kind of national leadership that I think we have needed, the Trump forces, which represent those forces in our history, were defeated in the November 3rd, 2020 election by 7 or 8 million votes. The popular vote with Clinton was a separation of 3 million votes. So the 2020 election, the vote for the Democratic candidate doubled in size difference with the Trump vote. I don't know how to explain that, and I have not worked with trying to understand that, but it was a 3 million differentiation between Trump and Clinton. It's a 7 million difference between Trump and Biden. I don't know how the social scientists are looking at that, but in spite of maybe some of the complexities of it, we, the people of the United States of America, doubled our vote against the Trump forces. And, no, I was hoping it would be 10 million, and I think I feel as though if the Democratic national donors had really put the struggle forth, if there had been more of the kind of campaigning that Stacey Abrams and her multiracial, multi-creedal coalition of Georgia had done, if there had been more of that around the United States, the vote would have been much larger. Because a common complaint that I've heard and read about the Democratic Party apparatus and power brokers is that they will not do the work. I know that in the Clinton-Trump campaign, I heard complaints from Democratic chair people of Florida. I'm trying to remember where the other one was, but there were a number of chair people of Democratic parties said the National Party failed them in helping them have the resources to do the work. My critique of our politics is that the political parties do not put at the top burner the Declaration of Independence or the preamble of the Constitution, both of which are quite unique to the best of my knowledge in human history, in that settlers in 13 colonies basically developed those two documents as the intellectual, spiritual, moral poetry for the establishment of a country. That's very unique. I don't think that ever happened before that time or since. But they put together those documents saying this is our philosophy, and that's why we are independent of the King of England. And that's why we're going to shape our country as independent people. That's the exceptionalism of the founding of the United States of America. That's the heart of it, and I don't think that national leadership tends to put enough emphasis upon we, the people of the USA, really learning those documents and those philosophies and that multiplicity of visions that are there. It's not one dream. I mean, they used some of the biggest words in the human language at that time: justice, liberty, unity. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all, they used the term men, but that all are created equal. They used the notion that the Creator endows human life with certain unalienable rights. Inalienable rights is the word in the preamble of the. Well, that is phenomenal language. I don't think at all that the United States leadership has historically or in the present moment demanded that all USA people study those documents from year to year in school and beyond. My comparison is, as a pastor, of meeting people all the time across my life from my earliest youth who claim to be Christian but are not willing to examine what Jesus said and did. We have 4 books in the Christian faith on Jesus. They repeat each other, but I've found many people who, I'm a Christian, but what about this love of the neighbor, even the neighbor who's mean and unlike you? And that clearly runs through the life of Jesus. But I've found many Christians who, that's too hard. Oh, that's too complicated. A major working principle of my own life has been very simple. You cannot overcome evil by matching evil, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Evil can only be overcome from a different level of an analysis of the problem. It has to be, the ancient literature says over and over again, you can only overcome evil with good. To find out how to do that, I think, has been part of my own lifelong pursuit. And so in my teaching today, it is about the power of nonviolence, the power of soul force. While many people has practiced that for more than 4,000 years, it is covered up in many ways. I mean, the U.S. history books that I've read in school, in particular, did not talk about strikes and boycotts on the part of people in the United States in order to get advancements in justice. The union movement does not get equal page-for-page analysis as does the business community. But it is the labor movement in the 20th century that pushed issues of safety in the workplace very often against the wishes of the bosses. It is the labor union that pushed West Virginia and Kentucky to recognize that black lung was a disease that coal miners came up with out of their work and the environment in which they work. It wasn't the owners of the mines. It was labor people. And I remember that in high school. The John Lewis of the Coal Miners Union often was in the newspaper over those issues. So my own short answer is that I have continued to try to teach people that acquiescence to evil is to participate in it, finding ways in which your own life seeks to overcome evil with good or hatred with love is more complicated maybe, but it's the way forward. It's the way to really learn to live. Both Gandhi of India and King of the United States insisted that the human race has to see itself in a change of paradigm where power in terms of violence must be replaced by power in terms of love and soul force. And that if we don't make that change, however long it may take, we as the human family are in very great danger of destroying ourselves. Because especially in the mid-20th century, we discovered that we had the massive power to destroy the earth and to destroy ourselves. So I don't know any other way. And nonviolence is not a mystery at this point, in my mind. Most people deal with one another through understanding and affection or liking or loving or caring. 99% of the human family today, 7.8 billion people, are not engaged in a quest for power. They're not engaged in a quest for wealth. They're mostly engaged in caring for one another, caring for their children. seeing that their children become productive human beings. So it's at another level that the world decides that an air assault in Syria is the way you handle the conflict with Syria. Most of the people in Syria think that an air attack is not a weapon for solving problems, but a weapon of battering them and killing them and messing up their home and their opportunity to live. It's only at a certain level of, very small level of thinking, I think, in the world that says an air attack will help you solve the problems in Syria. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
No, I don't. I totally.
but it's not. In the 20th century, wars primarily killed, bombing and raids and guerrilla attacks primarily killed women and children. Now that's been documented. Did not kill the presidents or the generals, the prime ministers. Did not kill the wealthy. It killed ordinary women and children. The wars and the violent attacks.
Let's talk about toxic patriarchy for a moment.
Yeah, okay.
Because
Yeah.
in analysis of, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, where are the women in the negotiations? There was a CNN special recently about the negotiators of all the peace deals. There weren't any women.
Yeah.
Talk about the power of patriarchy to impose
That's
itself.
right, that's right. The reason I am glad that the Me Too issues are being discussed now is because that's part of our problem. The woman has the special concern for the well-being of the family and of the children, as in a far superior way, frequently to the husband, to the father. So the emergence of women who can be poets and elected officials and business people and engineers in the academy is a critical kind of day-by-day change that has to take place, no matter who fights it or why they fight it. Because a woman brings a gender-oriented power to the table that we need for the world to become a better place to live in. When I came to this congregation in 1974, I frankly told our leadership in the congregation that I would be recruiting women as associate pastors. There was some static about it and some face-to-face talk where people told me they were opposed to it. But my point of view prevailed in the official processes of making decisions when we needed an associate, so that we got the first women pastors in this large congregation of 2,000 or more members. And two of the people who served in my 25 years as associate pastors are people who are extremely loved by this congregation right today. They cannot come back to this congregation without the outward enthusiasm of the members of the congregation for them. Now that's an illustration why we have to desegregate, we have to desexualize, so that more people can bring those human options to our tables at every level of life.
We have seen recently the power of African American women to transform society in ways that are unprecedented. I spoke with Melina Abdullah not long ago for the Regas event, actually. She speaks of the power of the spiritual power of Black Lives Matter, and that's what gives it its power, its strength, its resilience.
That's right, there's
Can
no
you talk
doubt.
about that in terms of Black Lives Matter as a spiritual movement?
Well, part of the intellectual climate in the United States has been extremely critical of religion. So I think that picture does cause us problems in the black community as well. But Black Lives Matters, well, let me do it another way. There are some social scientists who are indicating the extent to which, since the 1960s, all over the United States, a major movement at the grassroots level has been the development of nonprofit organizations. There are tens of thousands of them now across the United States that did not exist in the middle part of the 20th century. And they are concerned for all kinds of things. They're concerned for how public education teaches music, because music has dropped out of many schools. They're concerned for police brutality. They're concerned for wages. They're concerned for safety. All sorts of nonprofit organizations. Some of the social scientists who have written about that movement in the last 60, 70 years maintain that it is out of the nonprofit work at the local level that the spirituality and the moral compasses will become shaped in such a fashion so that the United States can make vastly more progress towards creating a nation with the quality of life that reflects Western Europe, for an example. If not all of Europe has reached a level of the quality of life the United States has only in certain places. Our system maybe have been part of the hindrance, but our racism, also I would say that our religious bigotry could be added to that, because I recall in high school the criticism of Roman Catholic students that went on in my circles in the high school, the criticism of Jewish students. They were not good enough as the rest of us. So at that grassroots level, all across the United States, there is work being done. As I have looked at the present moment, I know that the United States White House and Congress could obliterate inequality within about 30 years, because there is that program that came out of Mississippi in 1964 in the midst of our nonviolent movement called Head Start. And Head Start was the idea of early childhood socialization, education, and play planned and together, so that in the United States there's a entire cadre in education that says that if we put our 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old people into a quality human program that is part education, part socialization, part human development, we can eradicate a huge portion of spiritual wickedness in the United States. Now, much of Europe has done that with education and with family budgets in the national budgets, so that, for example, in Sweden and France, where I've had visitors to our congregation, where over in the 80s and 90s I had visitors, they already had national budgets that called for, when a new baby was born, the government provided a health care worker who came into that home with the new baby and gave so many hours per week to helping the family greet that baby and care for that baby. When I first heard that it was the 1980s, and I was, I was pleased but surprised. So where have we in the United States been? Every new baby boy or girl born in France back then and Sweden was greeted with a special health care person who went into the family and helped to care for the newborn baby. Now imagine that. Now that's what I would call a welcoming society. And there is no reason why the United States could not be in that same place.
I want to take a moment and reflect a minute. Rabbi Bierman, George Regas, Martin, Heschel, what would their message be today, given what this country is facing?
I don't know if I should dare try to suggest what that is. All of them, George Regas, Leonard Bierman, Abraham Joshua Heschel, represent the highest form and the most lofty, noble notion of the meaning of religion and of human life. All three of them represent that best, which I think is a part of the aim of the Hebrew Christian Bibles, which my thesis is that religion at its best is not dogma, not about belief systems, but about how you live, what kind of human being you are, and what are you trying to become. So Martin King and I and many others were in that stream of spiritual thought and theology. I've spent essentially 8 to 9 decades of life working to eradicate every form and every vestige of racism or hostility for any kind of human being. And I think that's what Heschel and Regas and King and Leonard would say. They would be working on that issue of trying to help us become what God wants us to become.
So, in a way, we are carrying the dream here.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in the moment where we are today, do you feel optimism? Do you feel cynicism? Do you feel about the future?
Well, it's a foot race that's going on. It is, the human race has many demands upon it. And so the noble visions are often dormant, often overlooked. My wife convinced me a few years ago that I should be looking at some of the commentary programs on television, so because I rarely did it. And I appreciate her push because I needed to get reacquainted of who's doing what and saying what in these days. Public discourse needs more talk about the role of compassion to bind people together in a society. They need to recognize, USA people need to recognize that the underside of love is justice and building a community where human freedom can be practiced and can be enjoyed. The voices in our society today who are saying, well, I'm not going to wear a mask because it interferes with my freedom. Well, that means they haven't yet become human enough to recognize that the mask wearing is one of the ways we act for the well-being of one another, and in all 50 states. The commandment that the Hebrew Bible in the books of Torah indicated, thou shalt not kill, is an advantage for the construction of family and neighborhood and village and community and tribe and nation. Thou shalt not kill is not a negative commandment, though it's a thou shalt not, because abusing each other and beating up on each other and destroying each other does not allow for the human race to flourish in the fullness of humanity.